Hello and welcome to today's installment of our speaker series, sponsored by the Mizuho Pride Employee Network. Now we'll hand it over to Rob to start us off.
Good evening. My name is Rob Cordell, and I'm co-chair of Mizuho Pride. I'd like to welcome you to our speaker series event for Pride Month. It's the third of 5 events we have this month. After tonight, we hope you'll join us next week on Monday for a lunch and learn with the team at the New York City LGBT Historic Sites Project. And on Thursday, we're proud to co-host with our colleagues at MADE a discussion panel on being a person of color and LGBTQ in corporate America. Now, to introduce our speaker and our moderator this evening, please welcome our CEO, Jerry Rosari.
Great, thanks, Rob. So tonight we are very excited to have Dow Chairman and CEO Jim Fitterling. Jim has been instrumental in the transformation at one of the world's largest companies from a relatively low margin commodity business to one of innovation-driven offerings. Over a 35-year career with the firm, Jim has held leadership positions across the company's business units. He was named CEO in 2018 and chairman in 2020. Jim has led the business to become financially successful, but also more environmentally conscious. In fact, under his leadership, Dow has become a founding member of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, which is an initiative seeking to put an end to plastic waste in the environment. Jim has also been a champion for equality. As the openly gay CEO of a Fortune 100 company, he has served as an inspiration to many who have thought that bringing their whole selves to work would not be accepted in a corporate environment. Mizuho and Dow have a long relationship going back more than 2 decades across corporate finance, ratings advisory, capital markets, project finance, M&A, and equity. And in fact, earlier this year at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Jim met with our group CEO, Tatsufumi Sakai, further enhancing the relationship between our 2 companies. It's my great pleasure to welcome Jim as our guest in celebration of Pride Month. And now I turn it over to Albert Hernandez.
Jerry, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for your continued support of Mizuho Pride. For those who don't know me, I'm Albert Hernandez, and I'm the co-head of Mizuho Pride, along with Rob Cordell. To our guest of honor, Jim Fitterling, thank you again for joining us for Mizuho's landmark event for Pride Month. We are thrilled to not only have an executive from a Fortune 100 company and a key client of Mizuho, but also an inspirational leader in the business community that has been advocating for diversity and inclusion. Thank you again, Jim.
Thanks, Albert. I'm really glad to be here, and I would just say to Jerry, Sakai-san and I have a good relationship, and we are very, very proud of the relationship we have with Mizuho. You've been a great supporter of Dow and our joint ventures, and couldn't be happier with that relationship.
Great, thank you. So let's start at the beginning. When you were a young child growing up on a farm in Odessa, Missouri, did you ever expect to be an openly gay CEO of a Fortune 500 company who's advocating for diversity and inclusion across the globe?
The short answer to that is no, but I would say you have to understand Odessa, Missouri is outside of Kansas City. It's a small town. I think growing up there were 2,800 people in town. I grew up on a cattle farm outside there. So on any given day at our high school, there were probably more tractors than cars in the parking lot at that school. So I never really imagined that, but it's been a great opportunity for me. I think growing up on the farm with the responsibilities that I learned and had there, the work ethic, the value system, and then getting a chance to go to University of Missouri, get an engineering degree, and go to work for Dow, that opened up many, many doors. And coming out would happen later in life for me, but the reality is I couldn't in a million years imagine that.
You have an impressive career with Dow. You've been there for over 35 years in various businesses across the globe. What was your most difficult role and your proudest moment at the firm?
I don't know if it was my most difficult, but I'd say one of the roles or one of the experiences I had where I learned the most was I spent 11 years in Asia. I started in Dow in technical sales, and I worked my way up into product management. And then I got a chance to move to Hong Kong and to lead a commercial organization in Hong Kong for the Asia Pacific region. And that got me some exposure at the very early days of China opening up. At the time when I went out there, it was 94. And I'd gone out there once previously, and China really started the opening up process probably around 1992. So to be out there in the early days and watch China open up and be part of it, and then have the experience to go through the first Asian financial crisis would be a good learning experience as I came back later in life to the 2008-9 crisis that happened here. So I had a chance to run a business there. I moved for a couple of years down to Australia. And then I was in Bangkok, Thailand, and that was an interesting experience. It was a kind of an integrated Dow site. It was at the time, it was kind of a miniature version of the Dow company integration. We probably had sales that were in $1 billion, maybe today they're $1.5 billion worth of sales, but it's a nice joint venture. So a great place to learn the inner working of the company. And then while I was there, we purchased Union Carbide, and they had a similar venture down in Malaysia. So I was actually moved down there to be the CEO of that joint venture. Those two CEO jobs gave me a lot of experience that I would bring back to the States. And when I got back here, I worked, on running the plastics business, which is our biggest business, and also did a lot of work on corporate development, doing a lot of M&A work for the company. And I would say probably the proudest moment, and maybe the most difficult job leading up to that, was when we did the Dow DuPont merger, and we merged two companies, 200-year-old DuPont and 122-year-old Dow. We never really merged them into one company, but we took two and created three out of it, and then spun it out. And I would say a proud moment was standing at the New York Stock Exchange and ringing the bell on the day we spun out Dow from that entity, because we had a chance to really put businesses together that fit together and start ourselves on a new path, kind of along the lines Jerry talked about, and get ourselves focused on some of the things that we needed to do for the longer term. And that's been an exciting part of the journey.
I could imagine both on helping revamp the business and also having the cross-border experience and working in different cultures. So this week has been a very exciting week for the community. This past Monday, the Supreme Court of the United States made a momentous decision ruling that Title VII prohibits employee discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. Before that, 29 states lacked that protection for LGBTQ folks, meaning you and I could be fired simply for being gay in the majority of the states in the United States. Many multinational companies like Dow and Mizuho have been ahead of the local laws protecting LGBTQ employees under their workplace policies, showing how the corporate world has been a force for positive change. What work do you see ahead of us to further ensure protection for the LGBTQ community, and how does that involve large multinational companies?
Well, I would like to say to Mizuho, it has been very important to have corporate America and corporations all over the world out in front fighting for equality. If I go back, I can remember when the Human Rights Campaign started, And, HRC this year, Dow achieved 15 consecutive years of 100% score on the Corporate Equality Index. And that is a fantastic accomplishment. But in reality, we've got an LGBT organization called GLAD that's 20 years plus history in the company. And one of the things that GLAD has done, which I think is just a showcase for how much corporate America or corporate any country can drive change, is in addition to being a resource group to help our employees internally and work with internal policies, it was a group that always had a strong advocacy agenda. So whether it was working on state protections or state civil rights laws, or working at the federal level on ENDA, or working on amicus briefs around the defense of marriage, a lot of Dow people put in a lot of time and effort, and the Dow GLAD organization spent a lot of time on policy, trying to come up with ways that we can move forward and protect the LGBT organization. And I think this week is just another victory in the right direction. And we've made so much change, and corporate America has been right there. And we were there right when it was time to sign on to fight this battle and put these amicus briefs together as well. And so I think it's very rewarding, and we still have work to do. We've gotten some federal help here with protections. I still think it's important for us to move ahead and get legislation that protects people from discrimination, not just in employment, but there's still ways LGBTQ people can be discriminated against for healthcare, for housing, for adoption, and other areas. So we've made a big step forward. We have some more work to do. That is work that collectively corporate America can do. And I also think this week and the events of the past several weeks really speak toward a common goal that we're starting to see on racial equality and LGBTQ equality. This ruling goes back to the original civil rights rules, that were written back in the 60s. And some of the issues that we're facing on the racial front go back to that same time period. And we've got to go back and take a look at racial equality. And I think from a lens of human decency, look at what changes and what advocacy do we need and what protections do we need for a part of our population that's been oppressed. And you as a Latin community member know that it's not just the Black community that has had oppression. There are other minority communities that have had as well. One of the things I was proudest of this past several weeks is that when racial injustice or racial justice became the focus and the topic, our GLAD organization and our Hispanic Latin organizations were the first ones to reach out to our African American network, African Heritage Network, and offer support. And offer support not as an ally, but also in ways that they hadn't had on their agenda before, and that is in the political advocacy arena for certain types of legislation and sometimes against other types of legislation, because we've had to do both. After the marriage ruling from the Supreme Court, there was a wave of state rulings that came out under a religious guise that were meant to really push us back into 30-year places we've been 30 years ago. And so we actually advocated on the opposite side of some of those laws. And I think we have to be eyes wide open that we've made a big step forward here. There will be some resistance somewhere. We need to be prepared for that. And that's where organizations like GLAD and corporations like ours can stand up front and show leadership. And we can do it because we can move fast. Legislation takes time. Policies in corporations can move fast. At the beginning of the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index, there might have been a handful of companies that could score 100. Today, we're in the hundreds. it may be near 500 that can score 100 on that index. Corporate America has made the shift, and the legislative community is catching up.
No, I think you touch on a very important point, the need for corporate America to advocate really for their employees, right? And, there's diversity in the workforce, and it's important that their employees feel comfortable and are supported by the company. You touched on another.
You've got to have representation too, right? I mean, you need to look up in the company and see that you're represented, and you need opportunities for advancement.
Yeah, that actually leads well into the next question. In a interview with Bloomberg Business Week, you posited, if you're a young employee coming to work and you think one of the top managers of the company is gay, but not willing to be out publicly, then what's your thought process about being able to be out? Well, if he's afraid of doing it, then I'm afraid of doing it. Was this a key motivation for you to come out? And would you share your coming out story with us?
Yeah, it was a big motivation. I would say there were a lot of factors that went into it. I was born in 1961, so I grew up in a time where there was a high risk of being discriminated against if you were out, and it was a lot more than 29 states where you could be fired for being gay. And so, when I was growing up, the natural tendency was, if you were in corporate America, you just kept that to yourself, and you lived your corporate life, and you kept that personal part of your life separate. And things changed. And of course, I was moving every 2 to 3 years and living in big cities, and you have some anonymity, and you could do that. I moved back here to Michigan, and Midland, Michigan's 40,000 people, so you're pretty exposed. The other thing that happened in my life was about 2008, I had stage 4 cancer. So I went through a few years that were pretty tough fighting that. And that allows you to do a lot of soul searching. And one of the things I said was, there's certain stresses I don't need in my life. And there's certain choices that I can make to relieve some of those stresses. And one of them was coming out. I was in line to be COO for the company. And my boss, Andrew Libras, I talked to him about this. This was at a time when several prominent people around the world were being outed by organizations. People were circling around and they were publicly outing public figures. And I said to Andrew, I know what's going to happen here. If I don't get out there and do this, I'll lose control. I won't be able to tell my own story, whether it's here locally in Midland or somewhere else. And I think it's more important to be a role model and get out in front of that and tell your own story in a way that can inspire others to come out and to create the kind of environment that we want. So after going through a process of talking to literally every board member at Dow individually through this process of becoming COO, they all, to a person, and some really great human beings, said, we're behind you 100%. You're making the right decision. You go ahead and do it. I came out that all started in like 2013, 2014. I came out on a webcast on Coming Out Day to all Dow employees. At that time, it was about 53,000. And
so no pressure.
Yeah, a little bit of pressure. That's an emotional moment to do anywhere, but you do it in front of 53,000 employees. And, the response was overwhelmingly positive. And the other thing I would say is it really changed the tone. We had a good tone and we had a good culture inside the company. We had an LGBT organization that had been around, at the time, almost 15 years and had really grown and made a big impact. And they helped me in this whole process. But I think what it allowed a different kind of conversation to happen, because somebody that was there in the C-suite was out publicly and unafraid to talk about it, and could say to somebody, if you're gay and you're working at Dow, you don't need to be afraid about coming to work and being out. We had all the policies. We did not discriminate on sexual orientation, gender identity, anything. But there's a difference between having the policy and what happens at work and how people act and the culture. And I think that allowed us to have a lot of very courageous conversations. I had hundreds of emails from people saying, you don't know how proud I am of the company. My sister or my brother is gay. I've got a son or daughter that just came out to us. We weren't sure how to handle this. One of the biggest things that we're concerned about is, will they be able to get a job and be successful like you? Will they be able to accomplish what you've accomplished? And it gives us some hope that if you can come out and be public about it, that they're going to be okay. And this week gives people a lot of hope too. And we've got to continue to keep moving on this positive state. I will say this to everybody in the group. If there was one simple thing, and I think especially during Pride and especially during coming out time, one simple act that has probably meant more to this community than anything is the act of coming out. It has allowed us to have discussions. It has allowed people to see that we're just like other people. We're trying to find happiness, live our best lives, find a partner that we want to live our life with. And that has changed public opinion dramatically. When I was growing up, public opinion was not, greater than 60% in support of gay marriage or non-discrimination. It was just the opposite. And look at how much that's changed.
No, I think that's a really important point. Policies are one thing, but culture of a firm is another. And having a culture where people feel comfortable changes the experience for employees. Do you have any suggestions on how to create a friendly environment for LGBTQ employees, where they not only feel safe at work, but feel supported if they're ready to come out? It seems like Dow has done a great job with this.
I think our biggest, culturally, the biggest thing that I try to communicate to everybody is, I think it's about human decency and how you treat each other. It goes back to, not to make it a religious thing, but just one common tenet of almost every religion in the world is the golden rule. You treat other people the way that you want to be treated, just basic human decency. And I think it applies for us. I think it applies in the case of racial equality. I think it applies on many different levels. If you can create that kind of open culture, supportive culture and environment, you're going to be a pretty formidable business entity to deal with. And our view, we talk about, it's a borrowed phrase, but culture eats strategy for lunch every day. That's our view is, we don't have to think about what's going to happen or worry about what's going to happen, because we know what the natural reaction of people is going to be. And I'll give you an example on culture. Right after the Supreme Court marriage ruling happened, there was a backlash of state laws that were coming out, and we're not in, big cities. We're in Texas and Louisiana, Indiana, Michigan, Alabama, lots of manufacturing locations. Louisiana, Governor Jindal was there, and they decided they were going to take a religious bill to the Capitol, and it was going to have a bunch of anti-LGBT language in it. And a group of our employees down in Louisiana heard about it, people that were involved with our GLAD group, but also just the site leadership. And 12 of them got in a Dow van that day and went straight to the Capitol and were there. And they were there with people from IBM and other companies that were big in Louisiana, saying, no, this isn't right, and pushing back. And eventually that legislation got shelved because it was clear it wasn't going to get passed. It wasn't going to get voted on. And so that's culture. They didn't call us in Midland to say, can we go do this? They just said, we need to act. And they went and did it. And in the same time in Texas, you remember the famous bathroom bills that came up in Houston? Our Gulf Coast operations leader, Earl Ship, was living at the time in Houston. he saw that. He wrote an op-ed for the Chronicle. He, called us up and he said, we need to mobilize. We need to get in front of the governor. We need to get in front of the legislature, and led the activity. So, we know where we stand on these issues, and our people feel empowered to go tackle them, whether it's in favor of non-discrimination, or it's anti-racism, or it's fighting back against the opposite that's going to happen. So, we've been a proponent for ENDA, Employment Non-Discrimination Act, for a long time, and that applies across the board to everybody. We'll continue to push for these kind of changes because we think it's the right thing to do, and it's also good for business.
Yeah, I think we went back to an earlier talk about point about corporate advocacy, and I think it's really effective. Before my time at Mizuho, my past firm, we had pretty big offices in some conservative states, and they were passing similar legislation, but they used the pressure of their large employment base to pressure the local governments to not pass the legislation. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to further develop the workplace because their employees didn't feel safe. So I think that's a very good point, and I think that really pays dividends to the employees, right? You get as a gay, a member of that firm, it meant the world to me to see that level of support from my leadership.
It builds loyalty. And then the other thing, you mentioned community. The other thing it does is it percolates through the community. So many of the leaders that we have in our company, many of our employees are looked at to all kinds of organizations throughout the community to provide support. They may serve on city government. They may serve on charitable organizations. They can have huge influence throughout the community. So you have, an employee resource group inside a corporation has a lot more power than it might think it has. And it has access to company resources that they need to respect and use in the right way, but they don't need to be afraid to use them. And we had, one of our strongest advocates was in our Washington, D.C. office, was a lawyer who literally wrote large parts of the amicus briefs that went in for Defense of Marriage Act. And, this is the kind of thing, people who are experts in their field are going to do. These are the acts of allies that are there helping you out, trying to make a difference. And that's what we're trying to do right now for the Black community is also show them that, allies need to step up. And real allies are the ones who are going to go out and take an action on your behalf. Yes, money is important. It's important to make a contribution. There are a lot of things that are important, but the most important thing is you need to act on somebody else's behalf so that they get treated fairly.
No, that's a very good point, and it really leads into my next question. Allyship has been so important in the LGBTQ community. I think that's really what's been the game changer. As you said, we've become more visible, and as we become more visible, allies have been supporting us and helping affect change, whether it's in the corporate world or in the world of legislation. So that's important. But given the time we're living in, there's a strong sense of solidarity amongst the LGBTQ community and the struggle for equality for people of color and women. I know you sit as an executive sponsor of Dow's Global African Affinity Network, so allyship is clearly very important to you as well. You've spoken about it at length so far. How would you recommend we continue to support these groups, both in the office and outside of it? I know you've already mentioned action's very important, but what more can we be doing?
Sure. I just one comment on allyship that I think is important. When we look at our groups that have been so successful internally and externally in our employee resource groups, we have 10 employee resource groups today. One of the things we learned from GLAD, our LGBTQ plus group, is always, it's our largest group in the company, and it's 80% allies. And if you go to one of the events at GLAD, it is one of the most diverse, unassuming groups that you're going to participate with because they're true allies. They all have an interest. Maybe they have a family member or a coworker or something. They have an interest, a reason to be in there that's a common interest. When we formed our President's Inclusion Council, we looked across the ERGs and we were trying to get ERG participation up. And we looked at, for example, the Hispanic Latin Network, the African Network, the Asian Diversity Network. And one of the things that we noticed was the African Network had no allies. There were no white people showing up at an African Network event. And we need those allies to help break down the barriers that are going to allow advancement and allow opportunities and get the representation to be the right way. So we said, you know what? We need allies for all these organizations. Today, our ERG participation as a company is 40%. It's north of 40%. It's gone from like 18 to north of 40% in a couple of years by encouraging allies. On the issues of racial injustice, we focus like we do for the other groups, like the GLAD group. We're focusing on advocacy, we're focusing on development of community, and we're focusing on talent. So advocacy is either internally or externally advocating for legislation or policies and change. It can be advocating for advancement, mentorship, those types of opportunities. That's important. Sponsorship is always important to help people move up. Community is about representation in the broader community. So what can we do to affect change at the community level? In the case of racial justice, it would be weighing in with our local community. We have community advisory panels because we manufacture in these small towns. Well, they include people like the chief of police, fire department heads, community leaders. We can exert influence there to change policies and change procedures that can help people's lives. Because remember, when they come to work, they may feel one way, but then when they go home and they live in a very hostile environment, they feel totally different. So community is an important part of that. And then talent, because opportunity, education, advancement are everything. You're not going to ever see equity unless you create that talent opportunity. So that's kind of the model for everybody, and that's what we're trying to drive for. And we have a lot of work to do with the African community. And I think we do still have work to do with the Latin community and the Asian community as well. But I think that model will work for all of them.
Have you guys, there's clearly a heightened realization that, the Black community has endured injustice. Has there been anything that Dow has done recently in terms of support for the Black community, in terms of statements or other things to show that Dow is there in support of your employees?
On Monday, we put out an action plan. It was called Dow Acts, and Acts stands for Advocacy, Community, Talent. We also made a financial commitment of $5 million, and that's going into some areas that we've supported previously, but actually increasing that support. Areas like historically Black colleges and universities, skill and vocational training to give people a chance, but also organizations that are helping influence policies and procedures both at the local, state, federal level to make things better for the community. Actions internally, for example, a social justice council. So if you think at work that you've been treated unfairly, or you've not gotten an opportunity because of racism, and this is one of the hardest things to deal with, who do you go to? Where do you go to make sure that you've got justice? And who do you go to make sure that you're getting the right hearing, the fair hearing that needs to happen? So we needed to do something different in that regard, so we created that organization. And then I think it's all going to come down to also a lot of education with people managers. education about racial equality and inequality, equity and inequity, representation, advancement. And I'm not talking about bias training. I'm talking about something more advanced than that. Advanced inclusion training, racial equality training in a way that people really understand. Because today I think we're seeing the response in the public eye is there's a lot of confusion about what's going on. I'll use one simple example. We were very clear in our statement at the end of the Dow Acts program, and we said Black Lives Matter. And sometimes you'll hear a lot of rhetoric around Black Lives Matter and all lives matter. And I heard a military veteran give this description, which I thought was a very apt description. And he said this, you know, when you're in combat and Smith goes down, you don't stop and say, all soldiers matter. You say, Smith is down, Smith is hurt, we got to fix Smith. Smith needs help. That's our focus right now. And so when everybody comes in and say, all lives matter, of course all lives matter. But right now, what we need to fix is the injustice in the Black community, because that community's down. Smith is down, and we've got to fix that injustice. And I think we've got to cut through some of this noise that's going on and really get to the heart of the issue. And that issue is, this is not new. What the Black community is facing is not new. They've been saying, I can't breathe for a long time. We haven't been in the right mind frame to listen to it. One of our leaders wrote an email last week and said, if we had the right mindset, we would have been hearing them say, I can't breathe for a long time. When Colin Kaepernick took a knee, he wasn't doing it to discredit the flag. He was saying, I can't breathe. And I'm representing a whole group of people that can't breathe. We just weren't listening.
Thank you. That's one, really insightful, and two, it's amazing to hear how far ahead Dow is with the topic, and how you guys have done things like building out the Social Justice Council. Sounds like you guys have best practices that could be shared with the market, because you seem to be very far ahead.
We're happy to, and when it comes to this area, just like with environment, health, and safety, when it comes to people and how we treat people, we're very open about sharing that. So we're very happy to do that.
Thank you. So the term equity and not equality is becoming more common in our discussion around diversity. And some who work in this space have begun saying equity and inclusion is the new diversity and inclusion. How is Dow creating a more equitable workplace? And what recommendations do you have for companies that might not be as far along as you guys? And clearly you guys have best practices.
Yeah, I think the challenge, we had a big discussion with our board. We had a board meeting right after the George Floyd murder. At the board meeting, we reviewed this whole program that I talked about, Dow Acts, and we got some input from them. And we have some very good board members. James Bell, who's a retired CFO at Boeing, African American. He's been on our board for a number of years, gave us some very solid feedback. Ajay Banga, MasterCard, is on our board. Ajay's been a role model for a number of years for our community, our LGBTQ plus community, the Asian community, but just an advocate for human decency, I would say. And one of the feedbacks that we got from James, I think, is the most important thing to deal with on equity is representation. And it's a little bit like me being an out CEO and chairman. If you're a gay employee in the organization and you look up the organization and you don't see anybody that looks like you, you have to be thinking, where do I fit in here? How do I belong? If I don't see a senior role model or a chance to get to a role like that, how do I belong? That's the same, by the way, if you're African, if you're Latino, if you're Asian, you have the same feeling. You need to be able to look at the organization and see some representation and say, I've got a connection here. I need to know who's on my side. And I don't want to look at a ruling that happened on Monday, for example, and I think it moves us forward a lot. But let's not kid ourselves. There are still people that are out there that are going to push back. One of the things you always have to know is who's on your side and who's got your back. And if you're in an organization and there's no representation above you that looks like you, who's on your side? And how do you really know? That is probably the biggest equity thing that we need to solve right now. That's what opens the doors to solving the financial inequities and all the other things that go along with it. So I haven't heard that until you raised it, the equity and inclusion thing, but we talk a lot about representation and how critical that is in our actions.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point that we talk about on our side as well. I think, we can do a good job of having a recruiting and have diversity and inclusion as part of that. But one of the problems that happens is as you go further along, are we properly making sure we have a bench of people who can compete for the senior leadership roles, who really represent the diversity we should have within these roles? Companies are stating that we need more diverse people at a senior management level and at the board level. How do we tackle this? How do we make this a reality?
Well, we've talked about inclusion and diversity versus D&I. And one of the reasons we have is because through our own history, if you focus just on diversity and representation, you can make the numbers move, but you can't sustain them over time. Inclusion really focuses on your culture. Do we create the environment where people actually feel like they belong? They feel like I belong to this organization, I'm a part of it. They feel pride of that, but they also feel like the organization cares about me. And I'm not just a number to them, but they understand me and who I am and what my challenges are. And so if you have that kind of a culture, then as you get the representation, your ability to keep it and sustain it over a long period of time is better. And so no question you have to do both, but I think to have it sustainable, the cultural element has to be there. It has to be from the board level all the way down. Everybody's got to be aligned on that. And that's why I said earlier, we have a board that's very supportive. Our leadership team is very supportive, but I got to make sure that I've got people managers all through the organization that get that and that can live those values. And that is one of the most important changes we have to make.
One sort of topic that's sort of in line with this, and something that we've spoken about is, unconscious bias training. And do you guys, and we've heard different things from different firms, do you guys use this as part of your conversation around promotions and compensation? Is this something that is integrated into sort of how you manage people and making sure that, the culture of diversity and inclusion is really being reflected in the actions of the firm?
So we do use unconscious bias training, and it works. I think it raises awareness and it helps people understand their own blind spots individually and as a team. And so that helps you with the culture. One of the changes that we made just recently, this year is the first year that we've actually put representation metrics for minorities, African, Hispanic, other minorities into our performance award program for people leaders. And this year's the first time, so we went to our comp committee and said, we've got 4 ESG metrics that are in our executive performance award program, top 300 leaders. We have about 3,000 people leaders. So we said, we'll start with the top 300 and we want to see how this works. And part of their annual performance reward is based on their ability to make a significant move up in representation metrics. And, it's the first year. I think so far positive, and the numbers we see are working. But I also want to make sure that I don't lose the cultural part of that, right? I don't just want to force numbers. I want to move culture.
So lead with culture, it sounds like.
Always, because that's what the DNA snaps back to when you're under pressure. When anybody's under pressure, and look at all the pressure we've had in 2020, what gets you through are your values and your culture. It's what is that response? And you can show me a couple of companies that have dramatically different cultures, and the one's got the strongest culture is going to get through any crisis. And that's been Dow's history. I mean, we've been through some tough challenges, but the company always finds a way to make an improvement and to come out better from those challenges. And that's what we need to work on.
Okay. Well, we actually have some audience questions that were submitted. So one of the questions is a bit off topic, but still an important issue, and it's around sustainability. And they alluded to the fact that you guys are a business lead in the launch of your next gen sustainability goals, and you guys were a founding member of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. Why has sustainability in the environment become such an important value for the firm?
I would say it has been for a long time. When I joined the company and was learning about Dow, and sustainability was a lot around the use of our products because, product stewardship and how product gets used is very important in the chemical industry. But over the last 30 years, it's really changed. It's changed from, how our product is made and how we manage our operations, the use of our product, but now it's changed to how do you create a blueprint for the environment that we want to have. So we're an energy intensive industry, and I'm talking about a lot of energy, like 5 or 6 large metropolitan regions worth of energy that we use every year. So we emit CO2 to make the products that we make. The products that we make are important for society, but we can't ignore the obligation to get the CO2 reduction down. So, this week we launched a new set of goals around protecting the climate, and that will have us working towards being carbon neutral by 2050. That's a pretty stretch goal for a company like ours, but I think it's an important goal for us to put out there. And we can identify a lot of things that we can do today to get there over the next 5 years as we develop some new technology. We have some gaps that we have to close, but we also have 30 years to make that goal. And so I think it's important for us to set that stretch goal and get out there. We also made a commitment. Half of our business is plastics. And so we also made a commitment, and it's an extension of the work that we did to create the alliance. But we made a commitment on plastics, which was stop the waste and close the loop. And stop the waste is about working on things like infrastructure, policies, regulations, et cetera, that will stop plastic from just getting turned into litter, mismanaged, and ending up in the oceans. And then close the loop is about making sure that the products that we make are all able to be recycled and reused. And the two kind of fit together. So in Stop the Waste, we said we're going to commit to get 1 million tons a year of plastic back into the feedstock stream. So instead of using virgin fossil fuels to make plastics, we're using plastics as recycled content to make plastics again. And on Close the Loop, we really talk about creating a sustainable business model to close the loop on that plastic so that we have a fully sustainable model. And ultimately, the idea is there is no need for plastic to be thrown away or landfilled. It can go back into another use and continue to do that over its life cycle. So those are big. Those are two big pretty audacious goals. We're not going to be able to do it alone. We're going to have a lot of good partnerships and collaboration, and we've got some really great partners to do it with. But we put them out there this week, and the response, I would say, has been very positive. Our view is, it would probably be easy to just hide and say, well, that's not possible in our industry. But we're scientists and we're engineers, and our job is to solve complex problems. So we're going to put the challenge out there, and my money says the Dow team's going to figure out a way to get it done.
That's really good to hear. We have one other question, and I think it came from someone who grew up near you. They said, hailing from outside Kansas City, where did you watch the Chiefs win the Super Bowl?
I was in the stadium to watch the Chiefs, proudly in the stadium. That was, in fact, one of the last trips I made this year. And I had not planned to go, but my husband, Alex, somehow along the way, I got him converted in to be a football fan and a Chiefs fan. And as the Chiefs were winning and as the playoffs were happening, Alex kept saying to me, oh, are they at the Super Bowl yet? Oh, are they at the Super Bowl yet? And I'm like, man, if I don't figure out a way to get him to the Super Bowl, this is going to be a bad scene. So I was there.
That's good to hear. So I think that's all the questions on our side. Do you have any sort of final remarks on your side?
All I would say to you is, congratulations on what you're doing. Thanks for asking me to come on. I am sincere when I say that our group very actively engages with groups all over. So on any ERG level, if you would like to share best practices, we're happy to do that. And just reiterate what I said to Rob at the beginning. The Dow-Mizuho relationship is very strong, and it's important to us. We really enjoy working with you, and I wish you all the best. I hope everybody has a happy Pride, virtual Pride, Pride at home, whatever you're going to call it. But and I hope, more importantly, that you're safe and everybody's healthy.
Well, Jim, thank you. Thank you for sharing your deeply personal experiences and insights with us. You'd mentioned when you grew up in the 60s, you didn't see, the senior leadership as openly gay men. I grew up, I was born in the 80s, and I never thought I would be able to get married or be out in the workplace. So it's the work of people like you that have been a big part of that change. So thank you for all that work and continuing to advocate for diversity and inclusion, not only for the LGBTQ community, but for people of color and women as well. So thank you for that.
We've got to keep doing it so that future generations have that same chance.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for making our Pride Month so special. And for all the people watching, don't forget to register for our other upcoming Pride events. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone. Have a happy Pride, everyone.
See you. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.